Welcome to Read, Write, and Live with Harte with me, Jenna Harte. This is our inaugural video blog, and I'm really excited. We're going to be starting today with the topic of second chance at love stories. This is one of my favorite all-time romance tropes. I am a total diehard romantic, and second chance at love is the one that basically says two people are destined to be together and nothing can keep them apart. Even if they get separated that first time around for whatever reason, that they will be brought together because destiny dictates that this love is meant to be. Totally love that trope. So we'll be talking about my all-time favorite second chance at love book. We will also be talking about writing second chance at love stories. And then we'll be talking about people who have had a second chance at love in real life. So sit back and enjoy. So now let's talk about my all-time favorite second chance at love story. Now I know there's a lot of great books out there that cover second chance at love, but my favorite was written a long time ago by Jane Austen, and it is called Persuasion. Now Persuasion may not be as well known as some of her other works like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, which is actually a big surprise to me because I think it is one of the best books she's ever written. And I'm not alone in that. Many diehard Janearts also put Persuasion at the top of their list or at near the top of their list of their all-time favorite Jane Austen books. Now the book tells the story of Anne Elliot, who is a woman who was born to a family with money and with a title. And when she is younger, 1920, she meets Frederick Wentworth. Now Frederick's got a lot going for him except no money and no title. So they fall in love and want to get married, but because he has nothing to offer her except a good character, she is persuaded into not marrying him, which sounds shallow, except you have to remember in the 18th century, marriages were very important, especially to women, to ensure that they could survive, because you still need money to pay the rent and to eat. The story actually starts 7 years later when Frederick actually comes back into the area because his brother-in-law and sister have moved there. Now he is a captain in the Navy and he has money. What he doesn't have, apparently, is an interest in Anne. He is polite to her, but he seems indifferent to her. And in fact, through the course of the story, at least through half of it, it looks like he might be courting another woman. However, what we see also through the course of the story is subtle shifts in Anne and Frederick and how they are relating and learning to understand each other and the decisions that they made. We also begin to see that Anne is a very different woman now than she was when she was 20. She's much more competent and confident, decisive. So Frederick begins to see that she will not be easily persuaded anymore. The real part of the story that stands out to me is near the end when Anne is talking to a friend of Frederick's, and they're talking about whose love endures the longest, particularly after a separation. And of course, Anne is arguing that a woman's love lasts longer after she and the man have separated. The friend, being a man, is arguing the opposite. Now, Frederick overhears this, and he is compelled to write her a letter because his love has endured, and he puts his heart out in his letter to let her know that it has endured. Now she reads this letter and of course goes to him. It's a romance, so all ends well, but it is definitely worth a read. If you are a diehard romantic, I dare you to read that letter and not swoon just a little bit. Now, if you haven't read Persuasion, again, I highly recommend that you do, especially if you've read and enjoyed other Jane Austen. If you're not someone who reads old literature, there are several movie adaptations, but the one that I would suggest you watch is the one that came out in the 90s starring Amanda Root. In my opinion, that movie closely represents not only the book, but how I felt the characters were in the book. The actors in it just do an excellent job with that subtle change and growth of the relationship and understanding between Anne and Frederick. So go read the book, go watch the movie, do one, do the other. Actually, you should do both. So So now let's talk a little bit about writing a second chance at love story. There are some parts to second chance at love stories that make them easier to write than maybe strangers meeting love stories. There are some challenges to it as well. One of the things that makes second chance at love stories a little bit easier to write is the fact that the characters have a history already. They already know each other. So when they are brought together in the beginning of the story, all the heat and snap, crackle, pop, and of course, maybe the resentments and the pains from the past are already there, and you can get going on all that emotional stuff right away. Because that's one of the things about a romance is you need to bring the reader in, you need to have them start having those visceral feelings of excitement and the stomach flutters and all that kind of stuff right away. But with Strangers Meeting Story, the challenge is to do that without it feeling forced or kind of obnoxious. You know, it needs to flow kind of naturally. You don't want the reader to think, oh my gosh, that's too much too soon. But at the same time, it is a book, it is a romance, and so you need to get into it pretty quickly. One of the nice things about second chance at love stories is that it's much easier to get into it quickly because there already is that history there of those feelings and experiences shared between them. The challenge of second chance at love stories is to have the characters evolved enough and change enough, and one of the goals in the story is for them to figure out how to overcome the stuff that pulled them apart in the first place. Because a lot of times, depending on what pulled them apart in the first place, those things can still be there. And in fact, to a certain extent, you want them there. You know, a story is a story because there's conflict and there's challenges to overcome. So they need to be able to navigate all that. For example, in Persuasion, what initially pulled them apart was the fact that Frederick had no money and title. So when he comes back into the story and he has money and he's a captain, you would think all is well. Except it's not, because she was persuaded by other people to leave him, and you know, he's not going to want to be in a situation like that again. So the story really is showing him that Anne is now her own woman, and she does that through the actions and the things that happen in the story. And of course, on Anne's side, he's come back into her life, but as far as she can tell, he's completely over her and has no interest in her. So it's only through the story that we see that that is not the case. Now, I have written a second chance at love story. I've actually written a couple, but the one that is really where I just grabbed onto that trope and said, I want to write a second chance at love story, was with a book I have called Meant to Be, coming out in September 2016. And in that story, I have characters who met and fell in love in college and had planned to spend the rest of their lives together. But then, of course, that doesn't happen. And 10 years later, they are thrust back together. Now, some of the same issues that pulled them apart in the past are sort of there in terms of misunderstandings and having thoughts and beliefs about what happened that first time that brought them apart. The other thing is the characters have changed a little bit in the interim. Mitch, the male protagonist, he has suffered some really horrible betrayals and a loss of a very good friend. And that has altered him in some ways, in that he is not as open as he used to be. He's not as trusting. He's much more closed off to the world. Now, Sydney, who is the female protagonist, she has also suffered a difficulty, but her response to it is a little bit different. She is actually now reaching out in the world, wanting to live her life to the fullest, which is what has brought her to see Mitch again, because he is sort of the regret in her life, and she doesn't feel she can move on until that is resolved. And of course, through the course of the story is how they navigate all the stuff that pulled them apart in the beginning, all the things that have happened since. And you know, the question is whether Mitch will allow himself to love and trust again. You'll have to read the book to find out. So second chance at love stories are really fun to write. There's parts of it, again, like I said, that make it easy because these people already have a history. But the challenge of the story is, how do you make it so that those things that happened in the past don't end up pulling them apart again in the future? And that's usually what the story is actually talking about and telling. Now, if you've written a second chance at love story or want to write a second chance at love story, I hope you'll leave a comment about it below, because I would love to hear about it. One of the criticisms of romance fiction is that it isn't real, which is always sort of a bizarre critique to me, because I've read a lot of different fiction in my lifetime and almost all of it is not real. I have never met a dragon. I have never met anybody who with a flick of a finger or an incantation that can clean their house with magic. And I am pretty certain that MI6 agents do not live the rich and lush, exciting life as James Bond, yet nobody criticizes those books for not being real. The thing about romance is there are things about it that could be real. People fall in love all the time, and sometimes they fall in love with the same person more than once. And so for this segment, I went out to find real life stories of people who had a second chance at love. The challenge I had is I was pretty much stuck to my own inner circle, and I do have one. I will tell you about a friend of mine. And the other aspect was going to the internet and finding all sorts of celebrities who made an attempt at a second chance at love. But of course, celebrities don't have very good track records when it comes to relationships. But I did find two that made an attempt, and even though it didn't work out, they're pretty famous. So I wanted to share them. The first is Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Of course, they were both married several times. Elizabeth was married, I don't know, 8 or 9 times. I can't even keep count of them all. But Richard Burton is the only one that she married twice. There's a part of me that thinks maybe they were meant to be together, but they all had their own problems. They had baggage. They just couldn't get out of their own way to make it work. Now, of course, in a fiction novel, that would be sort of the point of the story, would be how does this couple solve their problems? How do they make the decision that this relationship is the most important thing, so they make the changes that need to be made? In real life, it's messy. Life is messy, and people can't or don't always make the changes that need to be made. And of course, that's what happened with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. The other couple I found was Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood. They were the first couple I ever heard about getting married twice. And at the time I was a teenager, and I just thought that was the most romantic thing ever, about a couple getting married for the second time. See, I was a diehard romantic even then. The first time around, they were pretty young, or she was very young. She was about 19. But in the 70s, they ran into each other again, and all those feelings were there, and they remarried. And they were married for quite a long time. Unfortunately, Natalie Wood died in a tragic accident. So we'll never know if that marriage, if that love would have endured as a happily ever after or not. Hollywood marriages, those track records aren't very good. So if you look at that, maybe not. The diehard romantic in me likes to think that they would have gone all the way. So those are some real life celebrity type second chance at love stories. But I also have a friend who is in my writers group. He reconnected with his high school sweetheart about 45 years or so after he left high school, left that town, and never looked back. At that time they reconnected. They were both divorced. They're actually living in different states, so I'm not quite sure how they connected, but they did. And today they are married. They're neighbors of mine, and all seems to be going well. So second chance at love really does happen. And in fact, I think Facebook has probably made that opportunity even easier and more likely to happen for people, because now you can go on Facebook and you can find your high school sweetheart, you can find your college sweetheart, you can find your summer camp sweetheart, you can reconnect with people that you lost touch with, which gives the opportunity to have that second chance at love again. Well, that's it for today's segment on Second Chance at Love Stories. I hope that if you haven't yet read Persuasion, that you've put it on your to-be-read list, or maybe you're going to watch it. I know if you love romance, especially second chance stories, you will not be sorry to have read that book or watched the movie. Now, if you have read another book that's a second chance at love story, please leave a comment below telling me what it is. If I haven't read it yet, I'm going to add it to my list because, as I said, I love that trope and I will want to read it. I also hope that you will put Meant to Be on your to-be-read list. It is my second chance at love story. It is the second book in the Southern Heat series. You do not have to have read the first book to enjoy the second book, Meant to Be, but it's a good book too, so you might as well put them both on your list. Now, if you have a second chance at love in your real life, or you know somebody who does, it would be fun for you to mention that below as well. The reality is you can never hear about too much love in the world. So I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to wish you peace, love, and happily ever after.